All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're tackling a text that challenges an idea most of us hold pretty sacred. It asks a question that might feel a little unsettling. Is our belief in democracy fundamentally flawed? So, let's just get straight to the heart of it. The core question from our source material is this: is the entire system of democracy, the very thing we're taught to cherish, really just an elaborate illusion? Now, before we go any further, just a quick heads up. It's really important to remember that the ideas we're about to explore come directly from the source text we're breaking down today. Our job here is just to explain its pretty unique and challenging argument. And this text, wow, it does not pull any punches. It opens with a claim that just frames the entire discussion. Humans are not wired for democracy. We are wired for hierarchy. Right off the bat, it's suggesting there's this deep, fundamental mismatch between our very nature and our political systems. So you're probably wondering, how on earth does the text even begin to support a claim that bold? Well, it starts by looking way, way back in time, grounding its argument in what it calls our ancient instinct. The source points to this really striking number. For over 5,000 years, humanity's main and most stable form of government was monarchy. You know, one throne, one face, one clear line of authority. Simple. And then, in sharp contrast, you have modern democracy. The text presents it as this very recent, almost fragile experiment, only about 200 years old. In the grand timeline of human history, that's like a blink of an eye, and the source argues the cracks are already starting to show. So this historical argument then builds into a psychological one. The text starts to explore what it calls the burden of freedom, suggesting that deep down we might actually crave certainty way more than we value choice. This is how the text breaks down that psychological weight of choice. See, every real decision, it argues, forces us through this heavy sequence. First, you have the decision, which leads to confusion. Did I make the right call? Then comes the burden of responsibility for that choice. And finally, there's the potential for guilt. The text argues that most of us, instinctively, just want to avoid that whole process. And this all leads to the text's most crucial psychological point. Certainty feels better than freedom. It suggests we naturally gravitate towards strong leaders or rigid ideologies, not because they're better, but because they offer us relief from that heavy burden of having to choose. Now, to frame its whole critique, the source introduces this key philosophical concept, Kalyug. So what is it? Think of it as an age where the outward appearance of things, like freedom and choice and empowerment, it all looks fine, but the internal meaning, the very substance of it, has completely eroded away. This slide just illustrates that argument about responsibility perfectly. In a monarchy, there's one person to blame. It's a brutal kind of clarity, but it is clarity. But in a democracy, the text argues, responsibility is so spread out that, effectively, nobody is responsible, and that leads to a state of perpetual chaos. So this brings us to the source's next major point, its critique of modern politics as nothing more than performance, all happening in what it dramatically calls the age of noise. The argument here is, well, it's pretty cynical. It claims that elections have stopped being about choosing the best, most qualified candidate. Instead, they've just become an exercise in damage control. You're simply picking the less dangerous of two imperfect options. So if elections aren't about choosing the best, who thrives in this Kalyug? According to the text, it's not the wise or the capable. Power flows to the loudest, the angriest, the most manipulative, and ultimately, the best performer. And the text offers this really powerful thought. The throne does not corrupt people, it reveals them. The argument is that power doesn't just create flaws out of thin air, it acts more like a spotlight, exposing the human nature that was already there all along. Okay, so after all that heavy critique, you're probably wondering if the source offers any kind of solution. It does, and it's a controversial one. The idea of a benevolent monarch. So what does this proposed alternative actually look like? The text is very specific, defining this leader by what they are, and, just as importantly, by what they are not. First, let's be crystal clear on what this leader is not. The source explicitly states this is not a tyrant, not a conqueror, not some self-proclaimed god king, and definitely not an oppressor. It's working really hard to distinguish this idea from a simple dictatorship. Instead, the text presents this deeply aspirational vision. A leader who is disciplined like Rama, wise like Vidura, just like Vikramaditya, and visionary like Ashoka. Basically someone who rules for the well-being of the people, for dharma, not for their own personal power. So, it all comes down to this. The entire argument really boils down to one fundamental conflict, this deep mismatch between our political ideals and our basic human instincts. The fundamental claim is this: democracy is a beautiful idea in theory, but it's built for a species we aspire to be, not the species we actually are. It assumes a level of rational thought and emotional maturity that, the text argues, we just don't possess. Instead, the source paints this picture of humanity's core nature. We are emotional, we are tribal, we are easily swayed. And it's these powerful, instinctual forces that cause systems like democracy to buckle under the pressure. And that leaves us with the text's final, provocative question. Should we build our systems for the idealistic people we wish we were, or for the messy, emotional, hierarchical people we actually are? That is a challenging thought to leave you with.